What's going on, guys? Got a special one here today. This here is a 1983 Briggs Stratton Sno-Gard winter engine. They're fairly rare engines because, as most people know, from 1960 to 2008, Tecumseh was on 90% of all snowblowers. So, only 10% of all the snowblowers had other engines. Briggs, Honda, etc. Going forward, 2009 and forward, things changed. But when this was built, during that time period, 90% of the market was held by Tecumseh. Interesting thing to note, this 120 volt cord powered electric starter is even rarer than the engine itself. They made even less of those, and it works great. It actually makes it easier to start this engine, especially in the cold winter months when there's snow on the ground. But there's more of these engines than there is of the 120 volt starters. They're no longer available. They don't make them. I even checked eBay as of yesterday. There are none out there for sale. So that's actually a pretty high value item on its own. So a couple interesting things to note about this engine. I mean, I'm sure plenty of people have seen the regular 8 horsepower edition, but they didn't make many for winter. It's got this guard here to protect from snow getting into recoil. It's got this entire heater box, no air filter, muffler enclosed to keep all the linkages and carburetor warm, right? And then you have your typical choke right here. Now, you can control the throttle from up above manually this way, or you could also add a throttle cable to this and control it with a throttle cable. You could also add a key switch to this engine and run it up to the snowblower's dashboard. They even made a spot to put a key switch in here, which was never put to use. Now this engine came off of a 83 Gilson, which was, I think, an 8 horse 26 wide. Gilson was one of the few manufacturers that used Briggs & Stratton engines exclusively. Most other companies used Tecumseh, and a few of them used Briggs as an option. Like Snapper made a few snowblowers that had Briggs. Simplicity had one that had a Briggs. Lawn Boy way back had a Briggs. But the majority of Aaron's had made a few snowblowers with a Briggs. Toro had one with a Briggs. But most of their line were Tecumsehs. Another interesting to note about these engines is in the model system. The size of the engine and the year it was built is built into the engine. You see, it's a model 190492. That's a 19 cubic inch engine, which is 8 horsepower. It was built in 1983. 6th month, 15th day. The 10, I believe, is the plant or assembly line. And if you look on the head, there's also a 19 built right into here, because prior to these being 8 horsepower models, they called them Model 19s back in the day. It's interesting how the fuel line goes around back to the carburetor. It's a dual shaft engine. It has a 1 inch wide shaft, 3 inches long, with the keyway, and it's tapped. And it's got the secondary shaft, 3/4 wide by 1 3/4 long, with the Woodruff keyway. Okay, so that's a nice feature to have for reverse. And then if you don't need it, you just don't use it, and you could even cut it off at the end if you don't need it there. So like I said, I pulled this engine off of a Gilson snowblower. I had it sitting around for a year before I finally got to it. It was in overall good shape. The main problems with it was its fuel system was completely shot out. It was definitely pre-ethanol gasoline. The way you could tell was the gas in it had that stickiness to it. You know, that old school gas. So it must have been like a 90s vintage, if not earlier. And the tank had a little bit of rust in it. I was able to get that out with some uriatic acid and the nut and bolt shaking method. These fuel fittings were completely clogged with a hard, solid substance. And what I think it was lead from the gas. Over the years of it sitting in there, it built up hardened, and it became as hard as a rock. So I literally had to take a screw it through this crap, pick it out on that one, and on the 90-degree one on the carburetor itself. I had to actually sit there and pick lead out of it. And then I had to rebuild the carburetor. I cleaned it out and rebuilt it. It's got a brand new bowl gasket up above. This is your typical Briggs updraft carburetor. And let me tell you something, this engine is built great. Built better than any new modern Briggs. Built better than the Tecumsehs were. I'm honestly surprised that these weren't on more snowblowers, because this engine it's built so well. You know, it's got ball bearings up inside the crankcase, everything. It's just a very well built unit. So I just wanted to share it with you guys. Now I'll run it, and then I'm going to be getting ready to sell it. I saw one of these engines sell on eBay for $450 with the electric starter. That's what I saw one time about a year ago. It was on there for a while, but it finally did sell. This starter alone is worth about $200. Just this starter. They're almost impossible to find. So you figure the unit itself, $500 engine with the electric starter, or I could pull the starter off, sell the starter for $200, and then sell the engine for $350, and well worth it, because you know, it's your 318.5 cc engine. They're selling new overhead valve 250 cc's that they're trying to get away with calling 8.5 gross horsepower, and they're really not. They're more like 7, you know, and those engines are like $500 brand new. And this engine is, you can't get an engine like this anymore. And these are so rare, it's unbelievable. So let me go ahead now and start it up for you. Oh, one other thing, Gilson decided not to put the Briggs 8 horsepower logo here. I bought one. I'm going to be putting it on because, you know, it doesn't do it justice. People should know this is the 8 horsepower Briggs & Stratton engine. Okay, so it's on choke now. Plug it in, put the throttle at full, I'd say. That's full throttle right there. All the way, this way is slow. All the way to the top will shut it down. All right, here we go. It's got choke. There's no primer on this one. I want to note, on the later year ones, like I saw 188 on YouTube, that one had the primer right in this area, which probably helped make it a little bit easier to start. Because the one downside to these engines was they were a little bit more difficult to start in cold, wet, snowy weather versus the Tecumseh with the primers. So with the electric starter, it's much easier because it gets everything pumping much quicker. But if you are only doing it with the recoil and only choke, it's going to take a couple good pulls. And that was the one downside to them. But, you know, of course, you could always get a little bit of starting fluid and get it shot in there and use that as your primer too. But that was the one downside to these. Otherwise, the build qualities on these engines versus a Tecumseh is no comparison. Let me show it. It's got the clutch, the ball bearing clutch recoil. So before I even go starting it, I just want to show that works nice and smooth. Thing's got plenty of compression. I doubt it was even used that much. This engine's in excellent condition. Let me go ahead and crank it over right now. Briggs Stratton Sno-Gard. So smooth. None of that Tecumseh popping. And that was a cold start, by the way. I haven't ran this since yesterday. Now we'll go ahead and lower the throttle. Runs anywhere from 3,600 to 1,750 RPM. It's got a lot of torque. That's about 1750 right there, I'd say. Maybe a little bit slower. Let me do it by recoil this time. I let it get a little too slow. There we go. I don't have my tachometer on me, so I have to guess. That's mid-range. Might have to adjust the low speed idle a little bit more. Boop. Kicked off again. Like I said, you don't want to get it down too slow anyway because it's a splash lube engine. But you can get down to 1750, and then if you shut that thing all the way down, it cuts it off immediately. Probably needs a little tweaking of the low speed, but you know, high speed it runs perfect. So you know, I just do an adjustment on the low speed, it'll be good. But like I said, as long as you don't go too low, it's fine. 1750 is the lowest it goes. You can drop it lower, but that's when it'll kick off on its own. So close to idle now. See, it idles good. See if I can go a little bit slower. And then I'm going to pick it back up and then shut it down. There we go. We're getting down to low speed right now. Purrs like a kitten now. Shutted it down. So there it is, guys. It's a big money, very rare engine, and I'll tell you, put this on a snowblower, you're gonna have one good, powerful snowblower. So, yeah, it's an '83. It's a magnetron. It's one of the first years they had electronic magnetron ignition. They came out with it in late '82. So '83 was the first full year they had magnetron ignition. You go back to early '82, they still had points. So first year, this engine's completely original. It still has its original coil from '83, and they were built better back then. You could see the CDI chip that they had on them was separate, not like the new ones. You could see, and it's the original carburetor. It was red before I rebuilt it, but all that paint came off. And it's got brand new fresh oil, spark plugs good, fresh gas, real high quality built engine. So I wanted to share it. I'm gonna make a for sale video in a sec, but this is my latest sweet little engine. All right, later guys.